just wanted to take a moment and say Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year online. It's a time for hopefully new beginnings. That's what New Year's are for, is the beginning of something new. And I wanted to, even though we're not doing the officers right now, I just wanted to congratulate the new officers. And I wanted to give a challenge to you and the church. We made decisions to vote for new people and hopefully for new decisions so we can move forward with going out there and witnessing and rescue the perishing, as the song said, and to care for the dying. I think that we need to focus on that this year too, to reach out to where we are. Now, there is this movie that came out like 6 or 7 years ago. It's been a while, but the movie was called God's Not Dead. And there's this scene in the movie, and there is a young college kid, I believe he was a freshman, and he was taking on a philosopher. He decided that he was not going to sign a piece of paper that said God is dead. He couldn't do it. So the college professor said, okay, well, you can challenge me to proving that your God is real. And he said, okay. Now, all the people that was in his life was kind of against him, saying, you shouldn't do this. This is bad for you. This is not what you should be doing. You are not able to beat this college professor because really he's not trained. He doesn't really have that mentality to be able to beat this guy. And so he went up against him. And he went in there to prove that God is not dead. He went in there to prove that God is alive. And so he has his arguments, and the professor has his arguments, and they go back and forth. And at the end of it, the kids in the audience stand up. One starts first and said, God is not dead. And another one says, God is not dead. And another one, and another one. Until finally a lot of the people inside of that classroom agrees with him that God is not dead. Well, he went in against impossible odds, and the impossible odds, he was one against many. So today I want to look at another part in the Bible today about impossible odds. Now, we can turn in our Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to start in verse 17. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is it you, troubler of Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Ashtoreth who eat at Jezebel's table. So King Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. I just want to take a second here and point out a little something. Bad choices lead to bad results. Bad choices don't lead to good results, they lead to bad results. The king married the wrong person. He went to the wrong place and found a girl and married the wrong person. Making unwise decisions never goes well for people. The alcoholic should not be in a bar if he's trying to recover. The recovering addict should not be hanging out with people using or dealing if he's trying to get off. Bad decisions, bad choices lead to bad results. King Ahab had separated himself so far from God, hurting him, betraying him, and killing his prophets, that he was out of touch with God and God could not get through. A little bit of history on this previously of 17 through 20, just so we can set the stage. There was a huge drought going on in Israel for many years, 3.5. And the people of Israel were very probably upset because it was such an undue burden for them, because their cattle was having problems finding water. The crops weren't growing. There was all kinds of issues going on with no water going on. So that's kind of where we are at this point. People are really frustrated, and they are having some problems. So let's keep going. Oh, and the one thing too is Elijah had courage, and he said back to King Ahab, I am not the one making trouble, but you and your family are. You don't usually go to a king and say, you're the problem, because people, when they have problems, they don't tend to blame themselves. They blame somebody else for their problem that they created. So let's keep continuing. Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And the people answered, it is well spoken. Well, a few things of thought. Did the people truly expect a supernatural response? You know, the question is, or did they have no expectations? That's something that they probably got used to, like, this person can do this, and that God can do this, and this can do this, and that can do this. And they probably got told all these different things, and they never saw any fruit or any power from any of the other gods that they were worshiping. I don't know if they actually had any expectations, but they were probably ready for a challenge. So they were probably going to expect that nothing was going to happen of it. But let's keep going right here. Choose a choice each person to make. So Elijah challenged them, if you can't keep going one or the other, you have to choose between which one is real and which one is not. So he was wanting to have a Battle Royale, as they call it, a final showdown to basically see who was the real God. Joshua in the past said, choose you this day whom you will serve. So it was kind of the same scenario that Elijah was doing. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Now, the king brought all the people, the 10 tribes of Israel, and he, just to set the story, he had all the different tribes of people. So all the people were watching. They were seeing what was going on, who was there. It was kind of like probably a huge stadium, maybe. I mean, you can probably visualize that in your mind. There was a huge audience. So that's kind of where we are right now with this. So Baal's prophets, we're going to read in verse 25 now. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first. For you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar and they had made, and at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is God. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, for there was no voice. No one answered them, no one paid attention. You know, desperate people do desperate things. When people are far away from God, when people are far away from God, they are desperate for attention and sometimes to be noticed. The things in this world that demand our time and attention are only temporary. They're only here for a short time. But God is not here for a short time. He is eternal. He's always here. Something for Elijah and the prophets of Baal, the false prophets show up in our life. False prophets show up in the past. They show up here. They show up there. They call out, but there is nothing behind all the show they put on. So we can think in our life about something that attracts us, something that brings us to it, something that longs for our attention. Well, when in reality, when in the truth of the matter, and the statement is this, that there is nothing but show. It's just a show. Sometimes there's just shows on YouTube that are just shows about nothing. Well, it's kind of what this false prophets were. They were a show about nothing. Now, the funny part is, Elijah is mocking the prophets of Baal. And this king hates Elijah and maybe a lot of the Israel who had no water. So he is being pretty bold, saying, maybe you have to shout louder because your God can't hear you. And he's making a mockery to them. Maybe he is talking to somebody else. Maybe you don't have his attention. Maybe you don't have this. Maybe you don't have that. But the thing is this. Those desperate people, those desperate Baal prophets are being watched by the audience. There's just not a couple of people there. Like right now we have a huge snowstorm. There's not anybody really inside the building. We have a few people, but it's not like an audience of what they had. They probably had 30, 40, 50,000, I'm imagining, 10 tribes of Israel. They probably had a lot of people to come show up for this. So they're doing their thing. They're asking their God. They're cutting themselves. They're having blood gush out. They're getting desperate. There's no answer. Nobody heard anything. And this is where we're at. Right now, they have a show, but they had nothing behind their show. It was just false, and that's all that they could produce was just nothing. So let's keep going here. Going back in verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. One thing right there is the altar was thrown down. The altar was in disrepair. Nobody had interest in the God of Israel. They only had interest in the god, the Baal, and who was the rain god. And they had no drought, so they were praying to a God who was supposed to be able to bring rain, and there was no rain coming, so something was going on there. But however, they were praying to the wrong God. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the son of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seals of seed. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Let's just take a second and pray right here. Dear God, thank you for the message of Elijah and his witness, even though he went alone, God. So many of us in life are called sometimes to go alone and to represent you, God. God, I pray that you show up here, you show up online for the people who will be watching, God. You show up for the future people who will be watching online, God. And for us inside here, God, that we grasp something of what we are to be doing and what we are called to do. And I pray for this in your name. Amen. So he filled up the water. So I imagine that after this took place, that these Baal prophets were all like, "Oh my gosh, we have a huge show, a huge audience. we got nothing done. We just did all this stuff and we look silly. We look completely like an idiot. We look completely dumb. That's probably what the Baal prophets are doing, and they're completely nervous. They're probably talking amongst themselves in some sort of meeting, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to say? How are we going to make this PR problem that we have? What are we going to say to the people? How are we going to explain this? They're probably doing all this stuff. But then all of a sudden they saw Elijah. They saw him dumping water once, dumping water twice, and they're probably chuckling. They're probably laughing at him because, he just got done mocking them. He just got done telling them, hey, where's your God? He's not answering you. Why isn't he answering you? Maybe you should yell. Maybe he'll hear you. Well, he's not, they're probably just a little bit being more calmer after the water keeps getting dumped on his sacrifice. Like, there is no way that he is going to be able to get fire on that thing, because there's no way that you're going to be able to make that thing burn, because it's soaked. Nobody likes damp wood. I remember going camping, and going camping, we don't really have a trailer or anything. We have a tent. And when we have a tent, we, don't really have a place to really put the wood. We try to, cover it up or this or that. But if it rains outside, it becomes damp. And damp wood, trying to make a campfire so you can cook your food or, just have your fire or cook some marshmallows or whatever, it's really difficult to get that thing going. It's super difficult to get that thing going. And but imagine this. If the firewood is soaked, there is no way you're going to be able to start a fire. What do you got to do? You got to dry off the wood first. You got to make sure it's not wet anymore. So this stuff was soaked because it talks about how the water filled the trench. That thing was soaked. It was so soaked, there was extra water to go around. So that's the whole point. Now, it also says, is your altar broken? Well, we see that God's altar on Mount Carmel was broken. We see that the altar for him was in disarray, and Elijah had to repair it. So people didn't really have a concern for the things of God. They had a concern for the things of Baal. So they were following and worshiping the wrong thing. But Elijah, he was concerned for them. Israel let their idols come first and foremost. The things that pollute us and separate us from God is like that water. It consumes us. So the impossible, let's stop and think. As I was just talking about, imagine the nervous prophets of Baal doing all the stuff trying to get Baal to answer them, and maybe being nervous with the people. They was all show and no results. They must have been overjoyed to see him dumping water on the sacrifice. Now, I've done some math on these barrels that they were dumped on, and no matter the true size of the barrels, the sacrifice was soaked and running over with water. It was just not going to burn. Now, we have a miracle that already happened. There was no water because Elijah said there was no water going to be taking place in Israel. Because on his words, he said it, because God told him to say it. Now, we're looking at this with, there is no possibility of this altar being set to fire because there's too much water on it. So let's take a look what happens here. In Elijah's prayer, in verse 36, we're going to start here. At the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. He wanted to pray. He wanted people to hear that he was saying specifically to what God he was praying. He says, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. We can look at this. We can make a very clear observation that Elijah had concern for the people. He was concerned that they were following the wrong God. He was concerned they were going down the wrong path. He wanted to make sure that they had a choice and the opportunity to be able to turn back from the wrong God. Now, the results of him calling out to God, there was no doubt left in the people's mind that God won the battle and God answered the prayer. Now, I've been thinking, what kind of fire fell from heaven? I mean, it wasn't like a lightning strike. It had to be something miraculous for the people to fall on their faces. They had to see something incredible to know that God was God. Because it takes a lot for somebody who doesn't believe to believe. Because they said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. So there was no doubt left in the people's mind of who was God. Now, I guess the question we have to have is, do people really believe? I mean, we read what we read in the Bible. We hear what we are told. We are saying a lot of stuff, and we are doing a lot of things. Some people out there, some people in here, some people anywhere may have a lot of show. They may have a lot of, like the prophets of Baal, they may have a lot of ring-a-mering, a lot of excitement going on, but at the end, they're doing all this for nothing. They have no recourse or no results or no nothing on what they do. So, do people really believe? Most people, I don't think 100% trust God fully. That's what I think. I mean, that's what I think. We don't trust the one true God, even though He has proven time and time again who He is. We trust people sometimes more than we trust God. Why do we do that? I don't know. Do people really believe? How can the unbelieving believe if we do not believe, who say we believe? In the Bible, miracles are given during astounding events of supernatural warfare. We can look at Daniel in the lion's den. God sent an angel to defend him in the lion's den. That's an impossible thing. He should have been eaten alive. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he showed up in the fire. The couple of things that these guys have in common is that they put themselves out on a limb to say, I cannot stop praying to God. I cannot bow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the same thing. We will worship our God. Whether or not He shows up in the fire, O king, we don't know. But we cannot do what you ask us to do because we cannot. We have to worship God. He sent down fire from heaven. And as I was saying, it must have been something amazing for the people to respond like that. He parted the Red Sea when the Pharaoh and his armies were after the Israelites who he just freed. The Red Sea parted. The people had a way to go through. He proved He was God right there. He proved again. The virgin birth. Jesus raising from the dead. We forget who God is all the time. But if we believed, I don't know if we forget or if we don't believe, but if we believed, we would go. We would go to people that we know. We would open our mouths and tell people who is God. We would be on a mission to focus on our surrounding area. Sometimes, I understand, sometimes standing alone can cost you. Sometimes you have bad odds. Well, remember that, we'll go back to that God's not dead, that final debate. with that movie, because it could have been really bad for him. He could have failed his class. It could have really cost him some problems in his life. But he said, even though this may cost, I cannot say that God is dead. He had to take a stand. There was nobody else in there. There was a whole bunch of people, and I bet you some of them were probably Christians, and they probably just like, I just got to do this because my class says so. I don't really believe what I'm writing down, but you just got to do it because the professor's saying so. Well, it says if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. That's what the Bible clearly says. And so he is standing up for that. He's standing up for that particular verse. He's saying, who is greater? God is greater than this professor is, and I may not be able to beat this professor, but I cannot just stay here and say, well, I can just not, he's the student saying, I just cannot say God is dead because God is not dead. So he went through all his thing, going through all his studies, so that way he could prove to the professor and the children, the college kids in there, that God is alive. And sometimes we have to stand alone too. Sometimes we may have bad odds. Sometimes it may cost us something. Sometimes and sometimes it may not cost us anything. Sometimes everything will be fine, and sometimes it will not be fine. Now, God showed up in the past in miraculous ways. He parted the Red Sea. He protected Daniel. He dropped fire from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. God can also show up today. Now, I have on here, let's not melt into the quiet life in this world. Let's be bold. Now, we have decisions that we have to make here. We want to pray for church growth, and we want to pray for a lot of stuff. But just because we pray for it doesn't mean it happens. There has to be workers. Jesus says that basically out there, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. There is not many people going out to the workforce trying to find and bring in people. There is a lot of things that this new year we can do different. There's a lot of different ways that we can get our footprint out there. There's a lot of different things that we can do. We have to ask ourselves the question of, what can we do? How can we do it? What can I personally do? What can we personally do to outreach and be a witness for Jesus? Now, there's a lot of things, but this whole new year, it gives us 365 days and 365 chances to figure out, what can we do? How can we be a better witness? How can we be a bold witness? Now, Elijah, he was a bold witness. He had one person against the odds of 450. It was nearly impossible for him to win. Because if he would have lost, I'm sure they would have killed him. Because he would have been like, this is the reason why you have no water. This is the reason why, Israel, your sheep aren't getting any water. Your cattle aren't getting any water. There was a lot of anger and resentment toward him. And he ended up twisting and saying, no, it's the king who's doing this. It's this, it's this, it's this. So let's take a challenge for this new year. Let's stop and reflect upon ourselves and say, what can I do different this year? How can I be more effective this year? How can I be a better, bolder witness? Let's go ahead and pray. Dear God, thank you for the example of Elijah. Thank you for the example of standing alone, even when it's very hard. God, thank you for the movie of The God's Not Dead, with the one college student making a stand saying, I cannot say, write on that paper that God is dead. God, us as Christians, we need to focus and think to ourselves, what can we do more to reach out to the world? We have a lot going on here, God. There's a lot of people around us. We just need to find a way to reach them, and we also have to go out to reach them. They just won't come into us. God, I pray for your wisdom this year, and I pray for the new leaders and the new board members and the people that attend here, that we make the right decisions and that we have the boldness and the courage to go open our mouths to spread Jesus. I pray this in your name. Amen. I think we have a song